Hi, everyone. Today we'll be talking to you about Signifyd's newest offering, the return abuse prevention product. Wanted to introduce myself and Mariana on the call as well. I'm the Director of Business Strategy and Analytics here at Signifyd, and Mariana is our Director of Product Design and Experience, and we'll be taking you through an introduction to the market of our product and then also a demo. So to start off with, in Gayatri's seamless risk talk, there is this sort of notion that the customer's journey is full of important decisions that the merchant has to make, right from things in terms of acquisition, selection of items, account creation, checkout, fulfillment, and then post-fulfillment. This product will be targeted towards that last point, which is in the post-fulfillment world, should the merchant allow a return or refund. So to get onto what the problem is, merchants really struggle in detecting potential customer abuse as it relates to requests for refunds or returns. Things like, I never received my item, it's not as I described, opens up a lot of potential abusive customers that may be taking advantage of these merchants. And the issue is today that the merchants don't have the information that they need, and specifically customer service teams, to detect these abusive customers while also maintaining, the highest levels of customer satisfaction. You don't want to turn away a good customer, similar to in the checkout world. And so that's the issue that we are attempting to solve with this product. So our solution is we can leverage our vast and existing network level insights, which we have for our fraud prevention model, to help merchants in preventing these return abuse from happening. And that would be, we could offer an aggregated abuse risk score from low, moderate to high risk for a customer that will enable merchants to make these decisions on refunds and appeasements in real time. So it'll allow customer service representatives to quickly make a decision on whether a return should be allowed. And we can go through it a little bit later, what the options we have to do this are. At a high level, this is kind of some market level data that makes this problem extremely interesting. So returns, as we all know, is a key customer experience want by the customer. Everyone, free returns are basically table stakes, but it is interesting that they are growing at a much quicker rate than sales, and which potentially causes a bit of an issue for e-commerce merchants in terms of operational headaches, but at the same time, things like abuse can come into play. So if we look at the chart on the right, you'll see an entire e-commerce pie of about 61 billion in e-commerce sales. About 18% of those sales end up being returns, and about 7% of that ends up being fraudulent returns. So you're looking at about an 11.6 billion problem in the US alone. What is interesting is that, for obvious reasons, e-commerce returns have a greater share of total sales versus brick and mortar. You're seeing about 18% in e-commerce versus 10% in brick and mortar, presumably because customers in store can try on items and are happy with it without having to return them. Similar with, fraudulent returns, returning something in store. Potentially, customer service representatives in a store have a higher likelihood of catching an abusive customer, and so the share of fraudulent returns is also actually lower in the brick and mortar space than it is in e-commerce. So moving on down to the cost part of things. So we've kind of shown you what the size of the problem is, but what does it actually cost the merchants? We did an internal analysis here at Signifyd, similar to what we do with chargebacks. Returns also have a sort of multiplier impact in terms of cost on the merchant. What we found in our analysis is that the true cost of returns actually runs the merchant 3.7 times the value of the returned goods. accounting for as much as 38% of returns. So what that means is essentially, if you're looking at 154, if you look at the chart on the right, if you're looking at $154 billion in returns, which we saw in the previous slide, if you multiply that out 3.7x, that's a rough $584 billion a year cost to merchants. And if you take those fraudulent returns that we saw in the previous slide of around 11.6, you're seeing a $42.9 billion cost of returns that should never have been accepted in the first place. Impacts of why these multipliers exist are things like revenue, profit, and margins are reduced. You have to increase labor costs because you have restocking fees. You have to put back products on the shelf or on your site. There's logistics expenses, so things like shipping. You typically offer a free shipment back to your warehouse, and then the actual inventory that never ends up getting sold, which is shrink, which we saw in a study that around 25% of returned merchandise never actually gets sold again and gets liquidated. So what does that do for in terms of how Signifyd can help prevent this abuse? We're the only sort of player in the space that can prevent fraud, but also abuse across the entire customer journey. We see that with our guaranteed INR protection at checkout, where our goal is to approve as many legitimate orders as possible to fulfillment. And then in this particular product, in terms of our return abuse recommendation. So the thing that I want to highlight on, and that Mariana will go into in our decision center demo for you later on, is this product will actually allow merchants to have configurable recommendations to various styles of workflows and how you want to allow a customer. For example, you may want someone who has a loyalty program with you to never be stopped from returning a product. Things like that can be sort of implemented, and Mariana will show that in the demo. So examples of recommendations we may provide using the data we have would be things like approved for refund, flagged for review, inspection. We recommend that you don't give the refund. We recommend that you just do a refund in store with store credit. So these options are all based and weighed upon the data that we gather on that customer. And I'll stop here, but as my last slide before handing it over. But I think overall, what I've kind of given you and hopefully given you an idea of is that preventing return and refund abuse can actually mitigate losses for the merchant, but also improve the overall customer experience, which we know is kind of the gold standard for merchants in e-commerce today in terms of customer lifetime value. So just to go through kind of what this would help, what this product would help for merchants, you'd see, reductions in markdowns and out of stocks and appeasements for that merchandise that should have never been returned. Reduction in labor costs due to inspections, restocking fees, shrink from inventory that you couldn't sell. And then the last point being, I think the most important one, is improving the customer experience for your key customers, for your good customers, so that they can have a great experience and they continue to purchase from you over their lifetime. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mariana, who will take you through the demo of our product.
Thank you, Pranav, and hello, everyone. So I'll be taking you through how Signifyd's return abuse prevention solution works. First, I'll show you a typical workflow, starting with the return request from a customer at an online store. And then I'll show you actually how to set policies in the Decision Center. So let's take a look at how the flow of recommendation works. This flow assumes a customer initiates the request from an online return form. For a call center scenario, API to Signifyd would be initiated from the CRM, the ERP system that the employee already works from. So at the bottom of the swimming lane, you describe the actions from the customer, starting with the online return request. That request from the online store here on the middle lane is where you send the API request to Signifyd in order to receive a recommendation that they're on the top. So based on a few scenarios related to low, moderate, or high abuse risk that you can control with policies, the recommendation will be to refund on shipment or refund on item received, which will ultimately refund the customer their money. Or the recommendation could be to issue a credit to the store in a moderate risk scenario, where ultimately the customer gets credited the value of the order or the item returned. Or the recommendation on that scenario 4 would be that the return can only be done at the store, and that would account for a higher risk or moderate risk scenario. So for any of those scenarios, the feedback API will be key to sending back to Signifyd in order to close the loop on that return outcome to continue using that intelligence for future requests on that customer. So now the time for the demo. So let me switch my screen to our online store. So here is a typical online store landing page where your customer has ordered from you before. When a customer wants to start a return, they would go directly to your customer service side where you would have your return policies. And other policies. So the first thing is just to start a return. And if a customer can use a logged in route, even better, because you'll know something about them. And as I log in, the store will be able to recognize me and pull up any orders that are eligible for return. So typically I would select my item, select a reason of why I'm returning, and then continue with my return. I would like to drop that off at a UPS store. And at this point, as I'm submitting the request, the API would be being sent to Signifyd for an immediate recommendation response. In this scenario, a low risk buyer like myself would get an experience like this, where the instructions would be to just use the return label and go to UPS directly to scan it. And at that point, the customer would get a refund. Now, there could be other scenarios, as I mentioned before, or it might be high or moderate risk. And you might decide that based on the information you know for that buyer, that customer, you would want to have that return be in-store only. And so as you saw, that process of sending the API again returns a recommendation from Signifyd based on the policies. And in this case, you can control the rest of the experience for that customer, in this case, having them come online. Now, there are other legitimate reasons to request a refund. For example, a legitimate request for an item not received. So let's go through that. If I didn't receive my order, I typically, for due diligence, you would also want them to come directly to your customer service. So as a user, I would go here and just start getting information if I didn't get my order. In this case, I'll be chatting with your chatbot. And so as I'm logged in, it recognizes me, and I can start my conversation around not receiving the last order. So I can identify the order that I want to receive a refund. And typically, in the customer service, even if it happens on the phone, you will want to verify a few information. So this is just asking me if I looked for the package elsewhere. Yes, I did. And if I contacted UPS, which I did. And at that point, the conversation now goes to actually processing that request. And again, there's a moment of a temporary hold quickly where you would be sending that API request for a return recommendation, and Signifyd would now kind of return immediately that recommendation. In this case, again, a low risk, you might decide that on those cases, I would get automatically refunded. So a happy story there. Now, there are other cases, right, where in a high risk situation or analysis, you might decide that for that high risk, that refund is not possible. And so you would also determine what other steps for your customer experience you want, in this case, contacting UPS or any other. So I hope that gives you a good idea of what that looks like when you set up those policies and your customer experience. Now, let me jump into Decision Center.
Sorry, to question on that, Mariana. Yeah. If the customer wanted to use their own system to take a look at that, in terms of like they wanted to look at their own tools and CRM, would they be able to use that?
Absolutely, that's a great question, Pranav. So now that I am kind of presenting you Signifyd tool, you can see that there's a console on the top. And so let's say in a scenario where you might receive that request on the phone, your customer service agent receives it on the phone, and I'm requesting that refund. They could go to the console, but in reality, we do allow API integration so that within your CRM or your ERP system, where your employee already works from, they can request that that recommendation from Signifyd. It would be fed directly to that tool that they're using, and then any further actions would be or workflows would be automated from there. So yeah, we always have the Signifyd tools available, but we can do this integrating to your system. So I hope that answered your question. Thank you. So I was saying, let's jump into Decision Center so I can actually show you and help you understand how does it look to set up these policies that take into account the different low, moderate, or high abuse risk scenarios that I've been talking about. So this tool or set up tools under Decision Center are complementary to our machine learning and are utilized really focused on abuse. So the machine learning will detect the professional fraudsters, while this complementary solution allows you to focus on abuse, which returns is one example. It can also be utilized for promotions or coupon abuse, bank regulations. We've seen customers use it, and other scenarios that are very specific to your operation. So there's two components to Decision Center. One is policies, and I'll show you that during the demo. And here you can create and manage policies, and it includes simulation of results of that impact of that policies and integration with the systems that will execute on those recommendations or decisions and subsequent automated workflows on your side. And also there's lists, and lists essentially just allows you to group details of your customers or your store, including email address, credit card bins, IP address, promotion codes, product SKUs, and others. And those could be used as variables within the policies to be set up. So one important thing to highlight is that regardless of the expertise of your team in this topic, you'll have our Signifyd risk team to help you get set up and manage policies. So let me start showing you what that looks like. So to create a policy, the first thing is to select where you want that policy to take effect on, what we call checkpoints. And since we were talking about returns and refunds, I want to show you a scenario where we want to control our response to item not received. So in this case, I select a request refund. Refunds due to INR is essentially the template I'll be working from. Templates are something that we provide as part of your creation process so that we can give you a recommendation set of policies. We know that one policy would not be able to control a particular type of abuse, so we created a set that you can get started on, but of course you can customize, and I'll show you how. So the first step for this policy is actually to set up a default policy, because we always want to make sure that we don't affect good customers. So if there's legitimate INR situation, like your customer falls victim of a porch pirate or carry negligence or other, we want to make sure to solve for those and not affect those. So this policy would be a default, and it would be an accept policy. So I'll just jump that one to show you others, but essentially a good practice to always have. And so the first policy there that I can kind of configure would be to hold the delivery window, and this would be a hold policy. These are different recommendations or actions that you can take based on the configuration of your policy. So you can have hold, accept, reject, or like Pranav showed before, you might decide that the action should be to credit to the store, refund at the receipt of the item, and others. In this case, for this hold policy, we're looking at tracking status being equal to delivered, or if this tracking status is not available, and the days for fulfillment should be less than a week. And so you can configure all the details, you can edit what's there, and then continue. And so for a high risk or high abuse risk, we can also leverage the evaluation from Signifyd, which would be leveraging high, moderate, or low, in this case, high. The tracking status should be equal to delivered. And then we could be also utilizing variables across Signifyd. And so in this case, we want to make sure that the percentage of INR claims for that buyer it is greater than 10 if we are to address the kind of the higher risk. And so it could be based on email address, delivery address, or device ID. And we also want to make sure that that buyer is not a new buyer. So the first time purchase would be false. You can also leverage other variables to make sure that you have covered for your customer lifetime value, for example. And so in this case, I'll just add here a loyalty tier. Might want to make sure we don't affect any customers on a loyalty tier. And so that would be equal to false. And again, this case would be a reject. Okay. And for a medium abuse risk or moderate abuse risk, we can also leverage the abuse evaluation from Signifyd. And in this case, I would also be looking at the INR claims for that buyer to be less than 5. That I would consider moderate. And so that is a configuration you want to keep. Of course, if you feel like your configuration could be higher, you could do that. We want to make sure to not affect the customers. And so we kind of establish these recommendations that are pretty low up for that purpose. And then this one, the action would be to actually credit that order for credit to the store. And then finally, while creating a policy, we do have a best practice, which is to actually validate the policy using historical orders that you have identified before. So in this case, we identified 5 orders. We just want to make sure to run the validation. The purpose of this is to make sure that the policy is not overstepping and affecting other orders that you do not intend to. So we built in checks on the tool to help you do that. And then once our policies are done, really the step is to publish them again. And then the fun thing about publishing is 2 things. You can determine the ranking of your policies. This is essentially establishing the order in which the policy should affect your traffic based on if it complies with the conditions you have set for it. And so you see that you can easily reorder. And then last step is to simulate. And this is to make sure that you understand the impact of the policies to your traffic. And so we'll just run a simulation on historical data always for the last 30 days, which will typically takes less than a minute to do. And then this is the awesome part that you want to make sure that you understand the impact on it. And so now you see that the total refunds attempts are this number, with the refunds accepted, rejected, credited, or held, which are the actions that I chose. If you chose more actions, we will be able to see those there, including the difference of the impact and the change that happened. You can view this information both of count and GMV, and also understand basically what's the change. And we use this distribution table and graph to help you understand that and the impact per policy. Whenever you see something that may have affected exaggerated an action, let's say that too many were accepted and you didn't intend that, or vice versa, too many were rejected, you definitely didn't intend that, you can come back and fix the possibly the order of the ranking of the policies and recalculate to see the effect you want to accomplish. And so lastly, just to publish is as simple as just click on publish and will immediately start affecting your traffic. And so this is where kind of the team comes and monitors and manage the impact of those policies, and you'll see them by the different checkpoints that you have created policies for. So I guess I could answer a question that comes up often, which is why even use policies to solve for abuse? Well, unlike fraud, which is machine learning alone is an expert at, abuse does not have a common definition across every merchant, right? So promo code is a good example. With I did not receive, good customers might fall victim to real situations like I mentioned before, porch pirates and others. So machine learning alone will help you flag that behavior, but used with policies, you can offer other paths to a good customer experience without insulting good customers. So with that, I hope you enjoyed learning about Signifyd's return abuse prevention solution. Thank you all for your time today. And now back to you, Stefan.